We are all sensory beings. We can touch, taste, hear, smell, and see everything around us. And I didn't understand the meaning or the depth of that phrase until about 7 years ago, when a large white van struck my driver's side door in rush hour traffic, propelling me into the lane next to me. Another car hit me from behind, ricocheting me 2 more lanes over. And when my car stopped, I was able to climb out of the backseat window. Miraculously, I walked away to what I thought unscathed, my car totaled. The reality, however, is that I had a severe concussion that didn't show up for several days. And as a lawyer and communications expert running a virtual PR agency whose main business is to articulate complex legal and technology concepts, it made life challenging. The concussion left me unable to access parts of my brain, specifically my higher cognitive function, where I had difficulty processing speech and thought. When I spoke, I developed a stutter, and words came out differently. I slurred my words half the time, sounding like I had too much to drink, and I could no longer articulate complex concepts. Normal movements became hard with my spine and my back impact, and I was unable to run, walk, or function the way that I used to. I was left to discover a new normal, a new way of being. And just like that white van struck my driver's side door, COVID-19 slammed into all of us, individually and collectively, into a new normal, into a new way of being. What would you have said in 2019 if I told you that if we went outside, we'd be behind a mask, or that we would be living at home or working remotely, and that we'd be participating in online conferences, online coffee chats, and online happy hours, and yet this is our temporary culture until we emerge COVID-free. And the interesting part is that if we choose to, we get to decide what this temporary culture gets to look like for ourselves, our loved ones, and our colleagues. And culture provides the framework for social and personal interaction. What we're going through right now is a form of culture shock, a term coined by the anthropologist Oberg. With culture shock and many other processes of psychological adjustment, many people feel like they're suffering alone, thinking that they're the only ones not coping well with the circumstances. Frustration sets in as a person's unable to interact in a meaningful way. But gradually, as a person's able to slowly acclimatize to the new culture, their sense of well-being returns. But in this COVID culture, the sense of well-being isn't returning, it's quite the opposite. We're not embracing the sights and sounds of Rome and Paris and Beijing. Instead, we're confined within the prisons of our own homes. And for over 7 months, many of us haven't driven or walked to work, hearing the sounds of traffic or the bustling of people on the street. When we go outside for a walk to the grocery store or to an occasional restaurant, we're behind a mask. And we have limited interaction with our colleagues and friends, and that's over Zoom. And this is considered a prolonged period of sensory deprivation. In multiple studies related to prolonged periods of sensory deprivation, the subjects exhibited lack of clarity. Oftentimes, they were disjointed, disturbed, obsessive, anxiety-ridden. Motor skills, and cognitive efficiencies declined. And in some of the studies, because of the severity of the symptoms, the experimenters actually stopped the studies for fear of harm. And this is because the deprivation of the senses impacts the neuroplasticity of the brain. Instead of embracing a new culture where we're overstimulated with new sights and sounds and smells, instead, when our brain sees normal stimuli removed, our brains consider this as deprivation. And in this COVID culture, there are no new sensory inputs because we're limited to our immediate four walls, our limited virtual communities, and our limited communities. It's true. We've got great substitutes with Zoom and other remote collaborative technologies that's helped us stay in touch with loved ones and colleagues. Virtual reality tools helps to stimulate the senses in a made-up world full of goggles. But these substitutes don't replicate the feeling of being with a loved one or accessing all the senses. Nor do they replace the nonverbal cues that we receive when we're in the real world. We can't feel the exhilaration of being on a roller coaster ride or the sand beneath our feet. So how do we create a rich life that we could thrive in now and when we eventually emerge from COVID and reawaken our brains? By reawakening the senses. When our senses are stimulated, we feel more alive and inspired. We feel more awake and present. We want to be more, see more, and do more. In essence, our sense of purpose and well-being is restored. And going back to my story, it was at first hard to reawaken my senses. Given my previous active life, sitting still long enough to do a handful of exercises was at first difficult. I used meditation skills and visualization skills to envision running again, talking again, being active again. Memorization skills to remember phrases and numbers. Concept matching games to remember cognitive skills that I used to have, and puzzles to remember phrases and numbers. I'd often record myself every day so that I would make sure that I was articulating those concepts out loud correctly, often working with a friend to ensure that I wouldn't get discouraged. And above and beyond all of these exercises, I would move my body in a new way every day, even when the pain of the accident was almost too much to bear. But eventually, over a period of 2 years, where I repeated these exercises day after day, week after week, month after month, I was able to establish a new normal and communicate with the world in a different way through memorization, visualization, audio and movement techniques that we see in professional sports, television and internet ads, and other disciplines. And during this time of training, where, in effect, I was sensory deprived, just like we are now during COVID, I found that an intuition kicked in. And it's that deep, rich, inner voice that we have access to in all of us as humans. And just like animals communicating in nature, my senses were that much more heightened. I could interpret body language, hear the subtext behind a person's words, hear the excitement or anxiety in a person's voice, and I was able to communicate in a meaningful way. And more importantly, I found a new source of creativity. I began writing again, trusting again, inspired again. Given that I run a virtual company, you would think that this type of intuitive listening, this type of creativity would have been easy for me to access, but it was more difficult than I thought because I always made myself too busy to pay attention, to hear my clients' needs, my staff's needs, my needs. But the accent slowed me down enough so that I was forced to listen and choose my next steps. And in effect, that's what COVID has done for all of us. It has forced us to listen and observe and choose who we want to be and what we want to do. We all have access to that inner voice if we choose to listen. We have the opportunity to create a richer, more fuller life, one full of passion and excitement, one where we're more enthusiastic and devoted, one where companies can be more conscientiously aware of their staff's well-being, and where technology can innovate in a positive way, providing a bridge to the offline and online world. And I'm describing a new culture where dynamic CEOs of thriving companies haven't let COVID define them. Instead, they've shaped their reality and ours on how we play and we work. And now we have online access to courtrooms, exercise classes in non-traditional ways, and analytics and robotics stocking our grocery store shelves. These leaders use COVID as an opportunity for change, creativity, and growth. And had these leaders not tapped into their intuition, not tapped into their creativity, their innovations and ideas would have been lost to us, and the world wouldn't have benefited. But the key here is choice. We could choose to access our creativity in the void of COVID. We could choose to substantially shift how we interact with the environment and each other. And we can ask ourselves the hard questions. Are we showing up for our colleagues and team members? Are we showing up for our loved ones? Are we showing up for ourselves? And if we're not showing up for ourselves and everybody, how can we move in a new way? What can we create? The accident was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me as a leader. It forced me to acknowledge my limitations, trust the environment, let go of much of the work that I used to, trusting my staff to rise to the challenge. And I worked to innovate a culture that fostered teamwork and collaboration that helped us thrive then and is helping us thrive now. And just like the dynamic leaders that I talked about, my company tripled in size. And more importantly, I found a new voice, a new viewpoint that helped us thrive then and is helping us thrive now. And I want you to access your creativity, your intuition by going deep within and accessing your senses and accessing more parts of your brain. And as you listen, I want you to ask that deeper part of you these questions. How are you showing up for your loved ones? How are you showing up for yourself? How can you move in a new way? What can you create? This COVID culture doesn't have to define you. You have the opportunity to create a better, richer life for you. Just listen to that inner voice and reawaken your senses. Thank you.